In the blistering summer of 1851, an unsettling pattern began to spread across eastern Texas, one that would haunt plantation records for generations. Within just 18 months, 7 slave owners, spanning 3 counties from Harrison to Cherokee, met deaths that defied every medical explanation of their time. Each of these men had purchased the same enslaved man. Each had died within weeks of the sale. And in every county ledger, their deaths were described with the same chilling phrase: sudden failure of constitution. But what the authorities buried in those ledgers wasn't only bodies. It was a truth so disturbing that it remained sealed in courthouse basements until the very buildings themselves began to crumble. The man responsible never raised a weapon, never poisoned a well, never left a mark that could be traced. Yet he eliminated his owners with precision that turned him into something the plantation system had never seen before: a slave who could not be owned. Before we continue with the story of Samuel Kincaid, the only enslaved man known to have passed through 7 plantations and left 7 widows behind, I want you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now, because this channel explores the darkest corners of American history, the stories your textbooks refuse to tell. And while you're at it, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. What state, what city, because this story reaches every corner of the South. And I want to know where my audience stands when they hear what Samuel really did. The man who would later become known in whispered conversations as the Widowmaker first appeared in Marshall, Texas, during the spring cotton auction of 1850. His origins, however, remain deliberately obscured in the bills of sale, which list 3 different birth states and 4 different ages. Marshall sat at the crossroads of everything that made antebellum Texas both prosperous and paranoid. As the county seat of Harrison County, it served as the final major stop before the Louisiana border, where cotton, timber, and human cargo all flowed eastward toward the markets of New Orleans. By 1850, the town was swelling with cotton wealth. Brick courthouses replaced the old wooden ones, and plantation mansions rose across the piney woods, monuments to the rule of King Cotton. The Caddo Lake region provided water access. The soil was rich with clay that held moisture through brutal summers, and the railroad was on its way, though it wouldn't arrive until after the war changed everything. Marshall's white population hovered around 2,000, with another 3,000 enslaved people laboring on surrounding plantations. The social order functioned with the rigid precision of a church hierarchy. At the top, the old Texas families who had fought in the Revolution. Beneath them, the Georgia and Carolina transplants who brought their slaves and cotton expertise. Then the land speculators and overseers. Then poor whites who owned nothing but their skin color. And finally, those who legally owned nothing at all. Into this world stepped Thomas Caffrey, a second-generation plantation owner whose father had claimed 600 acres during the Mexican period. Caffrey ran what locals called a moderate establishment, 32 enslaved workers cultivating 300 acres of cotton, with timber sales supplementing income during lean years. He had a reputation as a practical man, neither cruel nor kind, the sort who calculated profits down to the penny and regarded his labor force with the same emotional detachment he reserved for his mules. Caffrey's wife had died of fever 2 years earlier, leaving behind a 19-year-old daughter named Catherine and a household marked by the quiet disorder of widowhood. He lived frugally, avoided the gambling and drinking that ruined other planters, and attended Methodist services with the disciplined belief that God rewarded hard work with prosperity. On April 14th, 1850, Caffrey rode into Marshall carrying $600 in banknotes, determined to purchase 2 field hands to replace workers he'd sold the previous autumn to settle debts from a poor harvest. The auction took place behind the Harrison County Courthouse, where a temporary wooden platform served as the selling block. Buyers examined the enslaved with the seasoned eyes of men who had been trained since childhood to appraise human bodies. Samuel Kincaid was lot number 7. The auctioneer described him as a male Negro, approximately 28 years of age, field-trained, no distinguishing marks or defects, with papers indicating clean title from a New Orleans dealer. What those papers failed to show, because the New Orleans dealer had carefully omitted it, was that Samuel had been sold 4 times in just 2 years, each time following the mysterious death of his owner. Caffrey paid $420 for Samuel, a fair price, neither high enough to suggest exceptional skill nor low enough to raise suspicion. The bill of sale was signed, witnessed, and recorded in the county ledger with the same bureaucratic precision that documented every other commercial exchange in Marshall. Samuel stepped down from the platform and followed his new owner to a wagon already loaded with supplies, showing neither resistance nor emotion. The ride to the Caffrey plantation took 3 hours, along roads that shifted from packed dirt to deep ruts as they entered the dense pine woods. Caffrey spoke little, only brief words about work expectations and the layout of the quarters. Samuel replied when spoken to, using the deferential patterns expected of him, his eyes lowered at all times. What Thomas Caffrey didn't notice, what perhaps no white man could notice because the social order forbade them from seeing, was how Samuel quietly studied everything: the distance between the main house and the slave quarters, the location of the overseer's cabin, the rhythm of each day's routine, the relationships among the enslaved, where authority was enforced and where it merely pretended to be. Samuel was assigned a cabin shared with 2 other field hands, given a blanket, a weekly ration of cornmeal and salt pork, and sent to work in the cotton fields the next morning. Over the next 6 weeks, his behavior gave no cause for concern. He worked steadily, though not exceptionally. He spoke rarely and caused no disturbances. The overseer, a man named Wallace Pruitt, who had served the Caffrey family since before Thomas inherited the land, noted him in his records as satisfactory, but unremarkable. Yet among the enslaved, whispers began to move. They noticed something the white men never did. Samuel asked questions, not dangerous ones that challenged authority, but careful ones that mapped the plantation's living patterns. He wanted to know who was favored, he learned who was punished, who had tried to run, and who had already been broken by the system. He learned that Caffrey suffered from debilitating headaches that left him bedridden for days, that he took laudanum to dull the pain, and that his daughter mixes medicine and managed much of the household during those long, incapacitated hours. He learned that the Caffrey plantation ran on credit extended by Marshall's merchants, that last year's harvest had barely cleared the debts, and that Thomas Caffrey was a man walking a financial tightrope, one bad season away from ruin. On the night of June 2nd, 1850, Thomas Caffrey retired to his bedroom, complaining of another of his recurring headaches. His daughter, Catherine, brought him his usual dose of laudanum dissolved in water, something she had done hundreds of times before. He drank it, dismissed her with a nod, and settled into bed to wait for the medicine to take effect. By morning, Thomas Caffrey was dead. The discovery came with the first light of dawn, when Catherine knocked on her father's door to bring him breakfast and received no answer. The door was unlocked. It always was. Who would bother locking doors inside their own home, protected by their own property? She found him lying on his back, eyes half open, his body already cooling in the pale morning air that carried the faint scent of pine resin to the open windows. Catherine's scream brought the household servants running, and within minutes, Wallace Pruitt was sending a rider to Marshall to fetch Dr. Ambrose Whitfield, the only trained physician within 20 miles. The doctor arrived 3 hours later, his horse lathered from a hard ride, and conducted an examination that he would later record in his personal journal with unusual detail. Patient discovered in state of rigor mortis approximately 6 to 8 hours post-mortem. No evidence of violence to the body, no unusual discoloration of the skin, no odor suggesting poisoning by common substances. Pupils fixed and dilated. Expression suggests neither pain nor fear, but rather the peaceful aspect of one who died in sleep. Upon questioning the daughter, learned that deceased had consumed his usual evening dose of laudanum for chronic head pain. Empty medicine glass found on bedside table, unwashed. Cause of death appears to be sudden failure of heart or respiration, possibly triggered by apoplexy or internal rupture. Given patient's history of chronic head pain, suspect underlying condition finally proved fatal. It was a perfectly reasonable conclusion for 1850 medicine, a time when doctors understood little about cardiac failure, and even less about the subtle ways a human body could be induced to simply stop functioning. Dr. Whitfield signed a death certificate, listed the cause as failure of constitution, accepted his $5 fee, and left behind a plantation suddenly plunged into chaos. The funeral took place 3 days later at the Methodist church. Thomas Caffrey was buried beside his late wife in the churchyard, beneath the same pine trees that shaded their house. Catherine, now orphaned and technically the owner of the plantation, found herself powerless under the legal restrictions placed on unmarried women. In practice, control of the estate fell to her father's executor, Benjamin Hargrove, a martial attorney who had managed the Caffrey family's legal affairs for nearly 20 years. The plantation itself slipped into the strange limbo that always followed the sudden death of a planter. Work continued because it had to. Cotton didn't wait for funerals, but the structure of authority had been decapitated. Wallace Pruitt kept day-to-day operations moving, but he lacked the authority to make purchases or handle finances. Catherine could issue orders to the house servants, but the fields were beyond her sphere. Attorney Hargrove visited twice a week, reviewing accounts and expenses, gradually arriving at the same grim conclusion every creditor in Marshall already knew. The Caffrey plantation was insolvent. 2 months after Thomas Caffrey's death, his estate was liquidated at auction. The land went to a consortium of Marshall merchants to settle debts. The furniture, livestock, and farm tools were sold. And once again, 32 human beings stood on the courthouse auction block, among them Samuel Kincaid, who had lived on the Caffrey plantation for exactly 11 weeks. The buyer this time was Robert Chandler, a man of greater wealth and larger ambitions. Chandler owned 800 acres, 67 enslaved people, a 2-story home filled with imported furniture, and an ego that matched his prosperity. He had come to Texas from Alabama in 1847, bringing his slaves and his agricultural expertise with him, and had prospered quickly enough to gain influence in county politics. At 42, married with 3 children, a deacon of the Baptist church, Robert Chandler believed slavery was not only profitable, but divinely ordained by Scripture. He paid $380 for Samuel, $40 less than Caffrey had, since estate sales always ran cheaper than public auctions, and transported him to a plantation that functioned with military precision. Chandler prided himself on running what he called a rational system, detailed record-keeping, scheduled punishments for infractions, and a belief that enslaved people would work efficiently if governed with consistent discipline. He was neither sadist nor reformer, just a man who read agricultural journals and convinced himself that efficiency was a moral virtue. Samuel arrived at the Chandler plantation on August 15, 1850, and was placed in a work gang supervised by Martin Yates, a man born into slavery, freed in his former owner's will, and now serving the very system that had once owned him. The irony was lost on no one, except perhaps Chandler himself, who regarded Yates as living proof that the institution of slavery worked. Good service earns reward, he liked to say. For 6 weeks, Samuel worked Chandler's fields, observed Chandler's routines, and asked his quiet, careful questions. He learned that Chandler suffered from chronic digestive problems that he treated with calomel, mercury chloride, prescribed by the same Dr. Whitfield who had examined Thomas Caffrey's corpse. He learned that Chandler kept meticulous ledgers of every expense and every profit. Ledgers that showed the plantation as profitable, yet burdened by substantial debts to New Orleans cotton factors. He learned, too, that Chandler personally inspected the slave quarters every Sunday after church, searching for stolen goods, hidden tools, or any sign of rebellion. On the evening of September 28, 1850, Robert Chandler complained of severe stomach pains after dinner. His wife brought him a dose of his usual calomel mixture. His wife prepared the medicine exactly as she had dozens of times before. He took it, retreated to his study to review the plantation ledgers, and was found 4 hours later slumped over his desk. His skin a ghastly gray, the color, his wife later said, of a man drained of blood. Dr. Whitfield was summoned once again. His examination, later recorded in his journal, carried a note of concern absent from his earlier entries. Patient discovered deceased at desk. Approximate time of death 2 to 3 hours before discovery. Skin shows unusual pallor and slight jaundice of the eyes, suggesting possible liver dysfunction. Known history of digestive complaints, and regular use of calomel for treatment. Stomach contents expelled before death. Visible in basin near desk. Death appears consistent with sudden organ failure, possibly related to chronic digestive condition. Mercury poisoning considered but dismissed, as patient had been taking calomel for years without incident. Cause of death recorded as failure of constitution, aggravated by chronic digestive disorder. It was another tidy conclusion, perfectly acceptable for the standards of 1850 medicine. The funeral was held at the Baptist church where Chandler had served as a deacon, and his estate soon entered probate. 6 weeks later, the Chandler plantation was liquidated at auction, with Samuel Kincaid once again standing on the courthouse block, now bearing the strange distinction of having been sold from 2 consecutive estates. That was when the whispers began. Quiet conversations among enslaved people drifted through the invisible network that connected every plantation in the county. Word traveled in murmurs. Samuel Kincaid had served 2 masters, and both were dead within weeks. Perhaps it was coincidence. It probably was. But people were beginning to notice. The third buyer was Daniel Hartford, and with his purchase, the pattern became undeniable. Hartford was a North Carolina transplant who had come to Texas during the Republic years. He ran what he called a Christian plantation, which meant he held Sunday prayer services for his slaves, forbade work on the Sabbath, and claimed that slavery was a sacred trust that carried obligations of care. He did not beat his slaves, not personally. That task fell to his overseer, because, as Hartford often said, discipline must be given without anger. He didn't separate families unless economic necessity required it, and he provided adequate food and clothing, meaning just enough to keep his laborers alive and efficient. Hartford's piety, however, did not extend to his business ethics. He owned 93 enslaved people spread across 1,000 acres, operated a cotton gin that processed crops for smaller plantations, and extended credit to neighboring farmers at interest rates that would shame a Montgomery Street banker. He attended church 3 times a week, quoted scripture in casual conversation, and truly believed himself among God's elect, a man chosen to manage the lesser races as part of divine order. When Hartford purchased Samuel Kincaid for $350 on November 12, 1850, he'd already heard the rumors. 2 former owners, both dead, but Hartford was not a superstitious man. He was a man of providence. If God had chosen to call those men home, who was Daniel Hartford to question divine will? Besides, the price was right, and the slave appeared strong, capable, and well-behaved. Upon arriving at the Hartford plantation, Samuel was assigned to work at the cotton gin, labor requiring more skill in the fields and granting him closer access to the plantation's business operations. He worked alongside 15 other enslaved laborers who operated the machinery, processed raw cotton, and loaded bales for transport to the Marshall Shipping Depot. Hartford himself spent 3 days each week at the gin, personally supervising operations and meeting with local farmers who brought in their crops for processing. He believed his visible presence prevented theft and ensured efficiency. He also believed that setting a moral example was essential to good management. He didn't drink, didn't gamble, and never consorted with women other than his wife. He maintained what he proudly called a clean household. What Hartford never realized, what his own sense of righteousness kept him from seeing, was that his clean household depended entirely on the enslaved woman who cooked his meals. Her name was Rachel. Rachel had worked in the Hartford kitchen for 12 years, ever since being purchased as a teenager from an estate sale in Louisiana. She prepared every meal, measured every ingredient, and managed the household stores with the unerring precision of someone who knew a single mistake could bring punishment. Rachel noticed when Samuel began asking questions about the household routines. She noticed when he asked about Mr. Hartford's habits, his health, and his daily schedule. And she noticed, though she said nothing, when Samuel began volunteering to help in the kitchen garden, quietly learning which herbs were used for cooking and which were kept for medicine. On January 7th, 1851, Daniel Hartford ate his usual breakfast of eggs, ham, grits, and coffee. He spent the morning in his office, meeting with a small farmer about a crop loan. Lunch was his routine meal of cold meat and bread. At approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon, while discussing a cotton shipment with his overseer, Hartford suddenly collapsed. According to the overseer's later testimony to Dr. Whitfield, Hartford had seemed fine one moment, and the next he couldn't breathe. His face turned red, then purple. He clutched his chest, gasped something that might have been a prayer, and fell to the ground. By the time they carried him back to the house and sent for the doctor, Daniel Hartford was dead. His face still bore the deep purple hue of suffocation, as though his heart had refused to stop even while his lungs failed him. Dr. Whitfield's journal entry for that day revealed the first flicker of unease. Third patient in 8 months, all plantation owners, all sudden deaths with no clear cause. Hartford shows signs of acute respiratory failure, possibly cardiac in origin. Yet the sudden onset and rapid progression suggests something beyond natural disease. Patient had no history of heart trouble or recent illness. Food stores examined, nothing suspicious. Questioned kitchen staff, no useful information. Cannot shake the feeling that something is wrong here, but cannot identify what. Cause of death recorded as failure of constitution. Sudden origin. The funeral was held at Hartford's church, where his fellow deacons eulogized him as a man taken too soon by God's mysterious plan. His widow was left behind with 3 children under the age of 10 and a plantation she couldn't legally operate. The estate entered probate, and Samuel Kincaid was sold once again, this time to a man who had specifically sought him out. His name was James Whitlock, and he didn't believe in coincidence. Whitlock was different from the others. 10 years younger, Texas-born, and educated at a military academy in Virginia, he had returned home to build his own plantation through calculated risk and meticulous management. He owned fewer slaves than Hartford, only 42, but he ran his operation with the precision of a soldier. Every detail of plantation life was recorded. The health, behavior, and productivity of every person he owned. When Whitlock heard the Hartford estate was being liquidated, he made inquiries. When he learned that Samuel Kincaid was being sold from his 3rd consecutive estate, his interest deepened. And when he discovered that all 3 previous owners had died of natural causes within weeks of buying Samuel, his curiosity turned to fascination. On February 3rd, 1851, James Whitlock paid $275 for Samuel Kincaid, a remarkably low price that reflected the growing whispers of bad luck, and transported him to a plantation that operated under what Whitlock called strict observation. Samuel was given his own isolated cabin, away from the other enslaved people. His food was prepared separately and delivered by Whitlock's personal servant. His daily work assignments kept him in full view during every daylight hour, and Whitlock himself made a point of speaking with Samuel every day, asking questions, observing his answers, watching for the slightest trace of danger. "You had some unfortunate luck with your previous owners," Whitlock said during their first conversation, standing outside Samuel's cabin while armed overseers lingered nearby. 3 men, all dead. Some might call that a pattern. Samuel kept his eyes low, his voice carefully even. "Don't know nothing about that, master. Just work where I was told to work." "And yet they all died," Whitlock continued. "Caffrey, Chandler, Hartford, all within weeks of buying you. All from sudden illness the doctor couldn't explain." He paused, studying Samuel's face for any reaction. "You know what I think? I think you're either the unluckiest man in Texas or the most dangerous." Samuel's voice was quiet. "Just trying to do my work, master. Don't want no trouble." "Good," Whitlock said, "because I'm watching you, Samuel. Every hour of every day, you're being watched. If you sneeze wrong, I'll know. If you so much as look at someone sideways, I'll know. And if anything happens to me," he leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper, "if anything happens to me, they won't wait for a trial. They'll hang you from the nearest tree and ask questions later. Do you understand? Yes, master. Whitlock straightened, satisfied. He had made his point, established authorities, set boundaries, and built a surveillance system to catch any sign of threat. It was a logical, military-minded solution to an irrational problem, but logic wouldn't save him. For 11 weeks, Samuel worked under constant observation. He performed his duties: carpentry on a new barn, repairs to the slave quarters, general maintenance around plantation. His food was separately prepared. He slept alone in his cabin, an overseer stationed outside. He gave no reason for complaint, no hint of wrongdoing. But Whitlock began to change. The endless vigilance wore him down. He slept poorly, startled at every noise, checked and rechecked his food before eating. His wife noticed the paranoia growing, the jumpiness, the suspicion, the wild accusations against servants who had served faithfully for years. The overseer's daily reports noted that Whitlock seemed nervous and erratic, not himself, like a man waiting for something terrible to happen. On April 19, 1851, James Whitlock dismissed his food taster, a young enslaved boy he'd hired for that purpose, deciding the whole practice made him look foolish. That evening, he ate dinner with his wife and children, retired to his study to review accounts, and spent 2 hours recording plantation data in meticulous detail. Around 10 o'clock, his wife heard a crash from the study. She ran in to find her husband convulsing on the floor, eyes rolled back, foam at his mouth. He died before help could arrive, his body still twitching when the doctor examined him. The symptoms suggested an epileptic seizure or poison, but Whitlock had no history of seizures, and no evidence of poison could be found. That night, Dr. Whitfield's journal took a darker turn. 4th death in less than 1 year, all connected to the same enslaved man. This cannot be coincidence. This cannot be natural disease. Something is happening here I cannot explain through medicine. The body shows no violence, no poison. The household reports nothing suspicious. And yet the man is dead, and Samuel Kincaid remains alive and healthy. I no longer know what I'm seeing. I no longer know if it's murder or a curse. To accuse without evidence would be professional suicide, but to do nothing feels impossible. I record the cause of death as sudden seizure of unknown origin. May God forgive me if I am wrong. The estate was liquidated. Samuel was sold once again, and the whispers that had once been quiet murmurs became open talk across 3 counties. Samuel Kincaid could not be owned. Samuel Kincaid killed his masters without touching them. Samuel Kincaid was death itself, walking the plantation system like divine vengeance disguised as property. The 5th buyer was a man named George Pute, no relation to Wallace Pute, the Caffrey overseer, who purchased Samuel for $150. Despite the warnings, despite the pattern, despite. Everyone told him he was by his own death. George Pute was either brave or foolish, or maybe just so deep in debt that he no longer cared. He needed cheap labor, no matter the cost. He lasted only 6 weeks before dying of what Dr. Whitfield recorded as acute respiratory distress, following the sudden onset of symptoms consistent with pneumonia, though the patient had shown no signs of illness before his collapse. The 6th buyer, Nathan Cross, paid $90 for Samuel and died 3 weeks later for what the doctor called paralysis of unknown origin, beginning in the extremities and spreading rapidly to the vital organs. And the 7th buyer, William Stokes, the last man who had ever owned Samuel Kincaid, paid just $65 for a slave everyone in the county already believed carried death with him. Just when it seemed the horror in eastern Texas had reached its peak, it deepened even further. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss more stories like this. Let's discover together what happened next, because William Stokes would do something none of the others ever had. He would live long enough to ask Samuel Kincaid directly how he had done it. William Stokes was dying anyway. At 58 years old, the former Georgia planter had come to Texas in 1849 with his wife 3 grown children, and 17 enslaved people, hoping to rebuild the fortune he'd lost to bad cotton prices and worse investments. He bought a poor property 40 miles south of Marshall in Cherokee County. Land not quite good enough for cotton and already stripped of timber by previous owners. For 2 years, he struggled through meager harvests, watched his children leave for better prospects in New Orleans, and saw his wife waste away from consumption until she died in the spring of 1851. By August of that year, when he heard about a slave being sold cheap in Marshall because of rumors no sensible man believed, William Stokes already knew the truth. He had maybe 6 months left before the creditors took his land, and perhaps less before his failing body gave out. The cough wouldn't stop. The weight wouldn't stay on. Every day felt like climbing a hill that only grew steeper. He knew he would die on that worthless land, alone, having failed at everything that mattered. So when the auctioneer in Marshall offered him a healthy field hand for $65, less than a quarter the usual price, William Stokes bought Samuel Kincaid, brought him back to Cherokee County, and did something none of the previous owners had done. He asked questions, not the sharp, suspicious ones Whitlock had asked, not the threats, not the accusations. Actual questions. On their 3rd evening together, sitting on the porch of a collapsing house, Stokes poured Samuel a cup of real coffee, not the bitter chicory substitute most slaves receive, and spoke to him like one man to another. "You've killed 6 men," Stokes said, his voice steady, without anger or judgment. "I know it. You know it. Every slave in 3 counties knows it. What I can't figure out is how." Samuel stayed silent, the cup warm in his hands, his mind turning over whether this was another trap. "I'm dying anyway," Stokes continued, staring out across fields overrun with weeds. "Got maybe 6 months before the consumption takes me, or the bank does, so I'm not afraid of you. I'm curious." He turned to look directly at Samuel. "How did you do it?" The silence stretched, filled with the hum of cicadas and the distant howl of a dog. Finally, Samuel spoke, and when he did, his voice lost a practiced dialect he'd worn for the past 18 months. "You really want to know?" "I really do. And if I tell you," Samuel said, "you'll have me hanged." Stokes let out a rasping laugh that broke into a coughing fit. When he caught his breath again, he shook his head. "Boy, I'll be dead before any trial could happen. And even if I wasn't, who would believe a dying man's confession? They'd say the consumption rotted my brain." He took another sip of his coffee. "So tell me, how does a slave kill 6 masters without anyone catching him?" Samuel studied the old man's face, searching for deceit, for the trap, the trick, the betrayal life had taught him always came. But what he found instead was exhaustion and a strange, genuine curiosity from a man with nothing left to lose. "You don't poison them," Samuel said quietly. "That's what everyone thinks. But poison leaves traces. The doctor finds evidence. Then you hang. You don't harm them physically. That leaves marks. You don't steal because they'll search your cabin. You don't run because that admits guilt." He paused, choosing each word like a blade. "What you do," he said at last, "is make them afraid." Stokes frowned. "Afraid of what?" "Of you, of death, of the thing they think you might do." Samuel's tone had shifted. Calm, deliberate, clinical. Thomas Caffrey had headaches. Everyone knew it. Took laudanum every night. Same dose, same time. I never touched his medicine. I just asked questions, careful questions, about his headaches, about his pain, about how bad it had gotten. I asked the house servants. I asked the field hands. Made sure the questions got back to him. Made him believe I was studying him, learning about his weakness. Samuel's eyes stayed fixed on the darkness beyond the porch. And then he started thinking about dying. Started worrying that the next headache might be the one that killed him. He began to notice every ache, every spasm, wondering if that was how the end began. He drew in a breath, slow and steady. He took his usual laudanum that night, but he took extra because he was scared, because the pain felt worse. because fear makes pain worse. Took enough to stop his heart in his sleep. Stokes absorbed this in silence, his expression unreadable. You killed him with his own fear. I made him aware of what was already killing him, Samuel said. The laudanum, the addiction, the headaches that got worse every month, the doses he kept raising. He would have died anyway, maybe in a year, maybe two. I just made him die sooner. On my schedule. Chandler, Samuel continued, same principle, different method. He took calomel for his stomach, mercury medicine, slow poison that everyone used, nobody questioned. I just made him notice his symptoms, made him think about organ failure, made him scared enough to take extra doses when the pain grew worse. Samuel's voice stayed flat, measured, clinical. Fear causes stress. Stress causes stomach trouble. Stomach trouble makes you take more medicine. The medicine kills you. All I did was start the wheel turning. Hartford, he continued after a pause, was more difficult. No habits, no medicine, nothing obvious. But he was devout, believed in sin, punishment, divine justice. So I made him doubt himself. Let him over here talk about Judgment Day. Left his Bible open to verses about false prophets. Asked questions about whether owning men was truly Christian. Never accused, just suggested. Samuel's gaze turned distant. He began to see signs of God's anger everywhere. His own guilt ate him alive. The fear weakened his heart, not poison, not violence, just fear chewing him from the inside out. Stokes sat in silence, taking it in. The others were easier, Samuel went on. Whitlock was already paranoid. I only had to feed that paranoia, make him see danger in every shadow until his body broke under strain. Pute and Cross were no different. You find the weakness. You make them aware of it. Let their own fear finish the work. He finally looked at Stokes, his eyes steady. Fear is the strongest poison there is. It leaves no trace, needs no weapon. It only needs someone already dying, already carrying the seed of their own death. You just make them see it. For a long moment, the only sound was Stokes' ragged breathing. Then he nodded slowly. You're not a murderer, he said. You're something worse. A mirror. You show men what's already killing them and let them do the rest. I'm a slave who refuses to be owned, Samuel replied quietly. That's all I've ever been. And now you're here, Stokes said, his tone turning grim, waiting for me to die of consumption so you could be sold again. He let out a wet, rattling laugh. Except I'm not going to die that way. Samuel's face didn't change, but something subtle shifted between them. I'm going to free you, Stokes said. Tomorrow we'll go to Jefferson. I'll have the papers drawn up, manumit you legally. You'll walk out of here a free man before I die, and the bank takes everything. He stood slowly, joints cracking, gripping the porch rail for balance. You want to know why? Because what you did, it's genius. You turned the whole system inside out. Used their own medicine, their own fears, made them destroy themselves while you stayed blameless. They'll never let me stay free, Samuel said softly. A black man in Texas with no proof of how he got that way? They'll sell me again within a month. Then go north, Stokes said. Get to Mexico, to a free state, somewhere they can't reach you. He turned to go inside, then paused. You know what the real horror is? It's not that you killed 6 men. It's that you proved slavery can't work. You can't own a man who's smarter than you. Can't control someone who understands your weakness better than you do. You're proof that the whole system's built on sand. He went inside, leaving Samuel alone with his coffee and the night sounds. That was the last time anyone saw William Stokes alive. He died 3 days later. Consumption, just as expected. No mystery, no suspicion. His body simply gave out after months of decay. But what followed revealed the true extent of Samuel's design and why he had never once tried to run. When the Stokes estate was settled, a process that took less than a week, given how little remained, the county sheriff found something strange among the papers. William Stokes had written a will 3 days before his death, leaving everything to his creditors except one detail. Samuel Kincaid was to be freed upon his master's death, with manumission papers filed in Jefferson confirming him as a free man of color. There was one problem. The will wasn't signed. Under Texas law, an unsigned will meant nothing. Samuel remained property, another asset to be seized and sold. The sheriff, Douglas Kimmel, a man who'd served since 1848, found himself in an impossible position. He had a slave tied to 7 consecutive deaths, all natural, all within weeks of purchase, and a dead man's unsigned will hinting at intentions no one could prove. Something was deeply wrong. Kimmel did what any cautious lawman would do. He locked Samuel in the Marshall jail while he investigated. 2 weeks passed. He found nothing criminal, but everything suspicious. He spoke with Dr. Whitfield, who admitted his unease but had no evidence. He questioned the widows. Each of them whispered suspicions but offered no proof. He talked to overseers, other enslaved people, merchants, all painting the same improbable pattern. 7 men, all dead of natural causes, all within weeks of buying the same man. 7 estates ruined, 7 families shattered, and 1 slave, Samuel Kincaid, alive, untouched, innocent on paper, yet somehow always there when death arrived. And the law could do nothing. Texas law recognized no crime in what Samuel had done, because it couldn't prove he'd done anything at all. He had wielded no weapon, poured no poison, shed no blood. Yet everywhere he went, death followed. Was, legally speaking, nothing more than coincidence, tragic, suspicious, but not criminal. The social problem, however, was far more complicated. The white community of Harrison County found itself confronting an uncomfortable truth. They had no system, no law, to deal with a danger they couldn't prove existed. If Samuel was guilty, then he was guilty of nothing more than using the system's own rules against itself. But if he was innocent, then 7 men had died by sheer chance, so impossible it shattered belief in coincidence itself. Either way, no one wanted him. When the auction was held on September 15th, 1851, only 3 bidders showed up, all land speculators looking to sell him farther west, where his reputation hadn't yet reached. The winning bid was just $42, less than the cost of a decent mule, from a dealer named Thompson, who intended to take Samuel to San Antonio, where nobody knew his name. But on the morning Samuel was to be transferred, something happened that no one could have predicted, something that would seal his fate and reveal the final layer of his plan. A group of enslaved people from 7 different plantations arrived at the Marshall Courthouse, asking to speak with Sheriff Kimmel. It was unheard of. Slaves approaching white authority directly, requesting an audience, as if they had the right to petition. The sheriff nearly ordered them whipped for their audacity, but there was something in their calm, deliberate manner that made him hesitate. He decided to listen. What they told him changed everything. Their spokesman, a man named Daniel, had worked on the Chandler plantation and had known Samuel briefly. Daniel spoke carefully, choosing each word so as not to implicate himself or anyone else, but making one thing unmistakably clear. The enslaved community knew truths the white one didn't. Samuel Kincaid ain't killed nobody, Daniel said, his eyes cast down, his tone respectful. He ain't poisoning, ain't fighting, ain't doing nothing you could hang him for. But he's teaching. Teaching? The sheriff asked. Teaching what? Teaching us how they're dying anyway, Daniel replied. Teaching us how to see what's already killing them, the medicine they take, the food they eat, the worry they carry. He's teaching us to notice, to ask questions, to make them see what's been killing them all along. Daniel's voice stayed level, but beneath it was something else, pride maybe, or satisfaction. He ain't making nothing new, Daniel said. He's just showing us what's already there. Sheriff Kimmel sat in silence as the implication sank in. He's training others, the sheriff said slowly, teaching you to do what he does. Daniel nodded slightly, teaching us how to survive, to know our owners better than they know themselves, to see their fears, their sickness, before they see it. Ain't nothing illegal about paying attention, Sheriff. For a long moment, Kimmel didn't speak. Then he understood the real danger wasn't Samuel Kincaid himself. It was what he represented. The knowledge that enslaved people could study their masters, understand them, and quietly turn that understanding into survival, even power. It wasn't rebellion. It was evolution. Evolution inside a system built to suppress it. That afternoon, Sheriff Kimmel made his decision. He declared Samuel Kincaid a threat to public order, not because of any proven crime, but because of potential for psychological rebellion, a term he invented on the spot. He ordered Samuel held indefinitely without trial, under the authority of maintaining public safety. It was illegal, unconstitutional, and entirely outside his jurisdiction. But it was the only solution anyone could imagine. Samuel Kincaid spent the next 3 years locked in the Marshall jail. No charges, no trial, no sentence, just silence. The county covered his upkeep through a special levy that everyone quietly agreed was cheaper than letting him loose again. He became something the law had no words for, neither slave nor free, neither guilty nor innocent, just an anomaly. And then came the war. The Civil War reached Marshall not as battle, but as slow decay, conscription, inflation, the steady collapse of the plantation system. Cotton prices soared, then collapsed. Confederate money turned worthless. The government requisitioned supplies, tools, even slaves. And in February 1863, with Union victories piling up and desperation setting in, someone in Richmond remembered the strange prisoner in Marshall. The slave who killed no one but terrified everyone. A letter arrived by military courier, bearing the seal of the Confederate War Department. It requested, which meant ordered, the immediate transfer of Samuel Kincaid to Richmond for a consultation on matters of psychological warfare. Kimmel understood the truth beneath the language. They wanted to weaponize him. If one enslaved man could destroy 7 masters without a trace, perhaps his methods could be taught to Confederate agents, used to cripple Union officers, politicians, anyone standing in their way. The sheriff refused. He wrote back, citing public safety concerns. Richmond replied with a direct order, signed by the Secretary of War. Kimmel tried again, this time explaining exactly who Samuel was and what he'd done, and why releasing it would be a mistake even for Confederacy. 3 weeks later, Richmond sent its final response. They didn't care. They needed the weapon. On March 15, 1863, Samuel Kincaid was released from the Marshall jail and handed over to Confederate custody. Escorted by armed guards, he was carried east by wagon, then by rail, through a crumbling Confederacy gasping for survival. When he arrived in Richmond that April, Union forces were closing in on the Mississippi. The end was visible on the horizon. What happened next was never officially recorded, but fragments survived, in letters, in diaries, in a few cryptic military notes. They tell us this much. Samuel Kincaid was interviewed by intelligence officers, began questioning him about his methods, demanding that he explain his techniques in detail. Samuel was cooperative, articulate, and seemingly honest, which, ironically, made his information completely useless for Confederate purposes. He explained that his methods depended on deeply personal knowledge of his individual targets, long observation, and the ability to manipulate circumstances from within. He couldn't teach Confederate agents to do what he had done, because his success came from being property, from living in his owner's home, being trusted enough to become invisible. He had exploited the unique weaknesses of specific men, using insights gathered over weeks or even months of careful study. That wasn't something you could turn into a military tactic. It wasn't an assassination method. It was survival through patience, intelligence, and a deep understanding of the system that enslaved him. The Confederate intelligence officers soon realized they hadn't been given a weapon. They'd been handed a philosophical paradox. Samuel Kincaid couldn't be used, his methods couldn't be replicated, and his experiences couldn't be turned into a strategy. All they could do was acknowledge that he had proven something the Confederacy refused to believe, that enslaved people were capable of defeating their oppressors through intellect alone. He was released in Richmond on April 23, 1863, with official papers identifying him as free. They warned him that if he was ever caught again within Confederate territory, he'd be immediately sold back into slavery. Samuel walked out of Richmond, carrying only those papers. The city already showed early signs of the coming siege: food shortages, skyrocketing prices, and growing desperation. He had no money, no allies, no connections. But he still possessed what always kept him alive: his intelligence, patience, and his uncanny ability to understand people better than they understood themselves. After that, the historical record goes silent. Samuel Kincaid disappears completely. No further documents mention him, no sales, no arrests, no death record. He simply vanished into the chaos of the Civil War's final years, becoming a ghost who had proven that slavery itself could be undone one master at a time, using nothing but observation and a quiet power of fear. Yet his legacy lived on after the war. When Reconstruction brought Union troops and Freedmen's Bureau agents to Texas, something curious began happening in the counties around Marshall. Former slaves, now freedmen, displayed a strikingly detailed understanding of their former owners, their debts, their business failures, their weaknesses. They knew which plantations were bankrupt, which former slaveholders were desperate, and which white families could be bargained with. They knew because they had learned to pay attention. They had learned that survival depended on knowing their oppressors better than their oppressors knew themselves. Samuel Kincaid's name never appeared in any records, but his methods had spread, quietly and visibly, through the slave communities like a living code. From one plantation to another, one person to the next, his lessons had reshaped how people understood power. Records from the Freedmen's Bureau in Harrison County, preserved today in the National Archives, contain dozens of cases where freedmen successfully negotiated for land, wages, or compensation. They did it by revealing detailed knowledge of their former owners' finances, hidden debts, unpaid loans, and decaying business partnerships. They had watched, listened, and learned not as property, but as intelligent witnesses trapped inside an unjust system. One of the most striking cases came in 1866. A freedman named Isaac, once enslaved on the Chandler plantation, confronted his former overseer for refusing to pay his promised wages. Isaac calmly produced a complete verbal record of the plantation's finances over the past 5 years, crop yields, sale prices, outstanding debts, all memorized piece by piece. The overseer, stunned that a man he thought illiterate knew every hidden number from his ledgers, was forced to pay him in full. Isaac later told a bureau agent that he'd learned the importance of attention from a man who once passed through, who showed us that knowing was surviving. The white community of Marshall struggled to adapt to this new, unsettling reality. Their former slaves now possessed deep insight into their private affairs. Some landowners abandoned their property altogether, unable to face negotiations with people who knew too much. Others adapted, realizing that these freedmen were now partners in rebuilding a shattered economy. Either way, they all learned something they'd long refused to see: that the relationship between enslaver and enslaved had never been one-sided. County records from that era show a sharp rise in land transfers, disputes, and negotiations where freedmen held unexpected leverage. Some of it came from economic collapse, but much of it came from a shift in power itself, from knowledge that had always been there, quietly waiting. In 1868, a journalist from Philadelphia visited Marshall while documenting Reconstruction in Texas. His articles, published across several northern newspapers, noted the peculiar sophistication of the freedmen in Harrison County, how they seemed to know more about their former masters' affairs than anyone expected from people supposedly kept in ignorance. He interviewed several freedmen who spoke carefully about the art of observation, of learning to read people when you weren't allowed to read books, of surviving through understanding. None mentioned Samuel Kincaid by name, yet many spoke of a teacher who had passed through during the war, a man who taught them that seeing could be as powerful as reading. The journalist also interviewed former slaveholders, recording their bitter complaints about uppity freedmen who knew too much about private business matters. One former plantation owner, who refused to be named, told him, "We thought we controlled everything because we controlled their bodies, but we never realized they were controlling. They possessed information we never imagined they could access. They knew our debts, our fears, our weaknesses. They were always watching, always learning, and we were too blind to notice." Dr. Ambrose Whitfield lived until 1874, dying of natural causes at the age of 67. When his journal was discovered after his death, it contained a final entry dated September 1851. It read, "I have concluded that what happened with Samuel Kincaid was not murder in any legal sense, but rather something far more unsettling, a demonstration that the enslaved understood their enslavers better than we understood ourselves. This knowledge cannot be unlearned. This understanding cannot be erased. And I fear that future generations will one day discover what it means when the observed become more knowledgeable than the observers." But Whitfield wrote something else, too. In those final pages, he seemed to grasp the true scope of what Samuel had accomplished. The real horror of the Kincaid case was never just the death of 7 men. It was the awakening of awareness among those we convince ourselves were incapable of such depth. Every enslaved person who learned to watch, to listen, to read their owner's fears and weaknesses became a threat to a system built entirely on the illusion of superiority. Samuel didn't just kill his masters. He destroyed the illusion that slavery could endure in the face of intelligent resistance. And once that knowledge spread, it could never be contained again. The 7 widows who survived the war and Reconstruction lived to see slavery abolished and their fortunes scattered. Some remarried, some left the South, some lived quietly in diminished comfort. None ever publicly admitted the possibility that their husbands' deaths had been anything other than coincidence. To do so would have meant acknowledging that the system they had relied upon was far more fragile than they ever imagined. Catherine Caffrey, daughter of Thomas Caffrey, married a Union officer during Reconstruction and later moved to Ohio. She lived there until 1889. In a letter written to her cousin in 1873, found years later in a family archive in Cincinnati, she reflected, "I sometimes think about the slave father purchased that spring, the one who was there when he died. I've read enough now, learned enough about medicine and psychology to understand what might have happened. Father's laudanum addiction was killing him slowly. Perhaps that man only made him aware of it. Perhaps he did nothing at all, just existed as a reminder of mortality. I'll never know, but I think of it often, of how we convince ourselves we were superior while being so terribly, vulnerably human." Sheriff Douglas Kimmel remained in office until 1867, when he was removed during Reconstruction. He died in 1882, still insisting that holding Samuel Kincaid without trial had been justified, necessary to prevent what he called psychological rebellion. History, however, has not been kind to his reasoning. Among his private papers, donated to Harrison County Historical Society in 1923 by his grandson, there's a letter written in 1870. In it, Kimmel admitted, "I held that man in jail for 3 years without charge because I couldn't prove he had committed a crime. But I knew he had destroyed the foundation our society was built upon, the belief that we were smarter, more capable, more deserving of power than the people we enslaved. He proved that false simply by surviving, and the knowledge of his survival, the story of what he'd done, spread through every slave quarter in the county like wildfire. I couldn't stop it. No one could. The moment word spread that a slave had beaten the system 7 times, the system itself began to collapse. The courthouse in Marshall still stands today, renovated, repurposed. The auction block is long gone. The ledgers that recorded Samuel's sales remain preserved. There are pages showing the falling prices and growing desperation of those who kept buying him. Even after knowing his history, they are relics of a world built on delusion, that human beings could be property, that intelligence could be owned, that power belonged by nature to the oppressors. Samuel Kincaid shattered all those lies, not through violence, not through escape, but through understanding. He showed that the most dangerous weapon an enslaved person could possess was knowledge, knowledge of medicine, of psychology, of the fears that haunted the men who thought they owned him. Whether he survived the war and made his way north, whether he perished during Richmond's final siege, or whether he lived quietly somewhere history never reached, none of that truly matters. What matters is what he proved, that slavery carried within it the seeds of its own destruction, that every act of ownership created a new opportunity for the owned to learn, to understand, and to turn that understanding into power. He revealed that fear could be a poison, one that required no bottle, left no trace, and could consume a man from the inside out. 7 men bought Samuel Kincaid. 7 men died, not because he killed them, but because he made them see what was already killing them, and then let their own fear finish the work. This mystery reminds us that the most terrifying weapon isn't always one you can see. Sometimes it's the knowledge held by those you convince yourself could never use it against you. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was truly revealed? Could Samuel have survived beyond the historical record, passing his methods to others in the chaotic years of Reconstruction? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more chilling tales like it, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who loves mysteries. See you in the next video.